I mentioned the last few days of drawing that the days when I go for a run, I tend to have more energy for drawing. But I feel like it backfired a little bit today. It's 2 days in a row that I've run a 10K. Man, am I tired. Sure, I'll catch a second wind here as I draw a little bit more. I think this is 24 days in a row of drawing at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Gotta double check, but I'm pretty sure yesterday was day 23. And it's starting to feel a little bit similar to how it feels to having like a routine of running or any type of workout. Just sort of feels like part of what my day is now, which is nice. I mentioned the last few days, but I'll be drawing at this time every day until the 13th, I think. Pretty sure that's the right day. And then I'll try to go live while I'm traveling a bit. I can't really speak to the connection quality for some of the places I'll be, but it'll be at different times. So if you're subscribed and all that, you should still see the notification when I make the live. And those will be slightly different. They'll be smaller portraits. So as an example, last time I was on a similar trip, relatively same destination. I met a couple local people, and I always travel with my camera, and I asked one of the local guys who runs one of the docks at the ferry terminal if I could take his portrait. And then the next day I went back and I had a photo portrait for him and a drawing that I did of him. And he liked it so much, he asked if he could have his father come down and have his portrait and drawing done, which I did all that. But we were speaking through Google Translate, and I don't know that we communicated clearly enough, and the shipping address that he gave me is really hard to decipher. So actually part of this trip is to take back several portraits that I've drawn of him and his elderly father, and then a few other people that we met on the last trip. So I'm trying to go back with that same intention, but it's a slightly longer trip this time, so a little bit more time to meet some locals and draw for people. But as an example, you can see, so this will be the size of the drawings that I'll be doing when I'm traveling. And then this one's not finished yet, but I have all these loose leaf papers, and this is actually the guy's father. So I've done this in ballpoint ink a couple times, some just black and white and some in color. And then I'll have this pencil one for him, and photoreal detail. So probably another day or two. I want to get this one really, really detailed. And then his son, I'll draw him again because I actually tore the page out of my sketchbook last time and gave it to him. I can't understand that. I don't have translate set up, like I have no way to chat back, but I think I understand. Thank you if that's a nice comment. But the intention of this trip is to kind of be a little bit more purposeful about meeting some of the local people and drawing, making sort of like more personal connections in that sense. So I'll document a bit of that, and I'll mostly be drawing in the evenings there, which are going to be in the mornings. So kind of opposite side of the timetable. I don't know if you could hear those birds that just flew by, but those are parrots. They're all over San Francisco. They sound like they're laughing at you. It's kind of funny. But back to what I was saying, when I'm traveling, I'm still going to try to go live as often as possible. Hopefully it'll be a daily thing still. But that one interaction in particular was towards the end of the last trip that I took, and was kind of one of my favorite moments. I have photos of him and his father as well. How's it going, Lily? I think. Thanks for stopping in. Yeah, so I'm hoping to go and meet more people like that. I have some other portraits that I'm going to draw. There was another, we were kind of traveling by a lot on ferries. So there's a lot of characters that work all those terminals. But there was one guy who he was kind of funny. We just called him the captain because every time we spoke to him, so I think he was honestly faking that he couldn't understand, because a couple times I said things and he knew exactly what I meant. But he had like cut off jeans and a captain hat and sort of matching like white, really like hip glasses. So I'm going to draw a portrait of him as well. I don't know if you can understand. I don't know what you're saying. I don't have a chat moderator or any way to pull up Google Translate, so sorry. Anyway, those birds that we heard earlier were San Francisco parrots, and they're all over a bunch of different neighborhoods. But supposedly one of the reasons that they're everywhere in San Francisco is because a homeless guy won the lottery a while back, and then he just bought tons of parrots and released them. There's a few different stories I've heard, but that's the most common one that I've heard living here. How's it going, Silvani? Like I said a second ago, I don't have anyone moderating the chat, and I'm streaming from a phone, so I can't look up what you're saying if it's not in English. So hopefully it's kind words. Still haven't chosen who I'm going to draw next, which we'll see how far I get in this. I have a sneaking suspicion I'll get to the end of this portrait before too long. I do have like a gallery of faces already selected, so it'll most likely be from there unless somebody throws a suggestion in the chat that I like. Really adamant about only drawing people that I find interesting, or characters from films or musicians. Occasionally I'll draw historical figures, but it makes it a little bit more complicated when you don't have a high definition photo, if you're doing photoreal portraits. So we shall see. So far in this series, not just the live series, but the series of portraits, I've drawn mostly just actors. And this one in particular is the first of the series that isn't based on a photo taken by Greg Williams or Brian Bone Smith. Which, funny enough, one of those photographers is actually on a trip not too far from where I'm going. He's also another fellow American that dresses like he isn't on vacation, which I support and sympathize with. So I don't really have like vacation mode clothes. Despite being a dad, I don't wear New Balances or cargo shorts. This character that I'm drawing now, if you're not familiar with him, it's Brad Pitt, but it's him as Cliff Booth from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is maybe one of my favorite characters he's ever played. Kind of has like all the best tropes of action and comedy in one guy. I've talked about it a little bit yesterday. I brought it up, but I keep seeing these photos that have leaked from the set of the continuation of that character. It makes me really curious where that story is going to go. I'm also just curious to see what it's going to be like to have David Fincher direct something written by Tarantino, because they're both so particular. And other than Robert Rodriguez or Tony Scott, I can't think of something else that Tarantino has written but not directed. Because he, oddly enough, wrote another film that Brad Pitt was in, True Romance. And it reads and sounds like a Tarantino film. Like a lot of phrases are very particular to him, and either film or literary references that are kind of in there for people that are generally funny or entertaining, but also if you know what they're talking about, it's even more of a payoff. As an example, in True Romance, Christian Slater at one point has like someone tells him a secret and he says, "I knew something was rotten in Denmark," and he's referencing Shakespeare, but it's a guy who works in a comic book store. So even when I was younger and hadn't read that play, I didn't know what he was talking about, but I got that it was something sort of written for like many different levels. And then in true Tarantino style, there's heavily flagrant language that is also maybe one of Dennis Hopper's most iconic scenes in that film, in any film. Sort of older Dennis Hopper. And then I feel like because Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino have worked hand in hand for so long, it feels natural when they sort of co-direct and write and work on each other's films, like From Dusk Till Dawn, or even the scenes that Tarantino directed that were in Sin City. It just kind of feels like a natural progression because both of those guys have really fed each other's careers. So I'm curious to see what it'll be like when Fincher is directing something crafted by Tarantino. I feel like it's, of all the directors they could hand that off to, I think he is the best choice, especially because he has a long-standing relationship with Brad Pitt in terms of producing films together. So I feel like even just having that shorthand is probably going to go a long way. But I'll be very curious to see if the character still remains, charming and funny. I'd say that the main thing I'm a little bit, or the main thing I'm most curious about is he going to be more like the novelization of the character? Which I would say is highly likely since they're expanding on his character and not Rick Dalton or anyone else from the previous film. And I don't know, I mentioned this a little bit yesterday and the day before, but Cliff Booth in the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a lot less likable. He still has moments where it's great and funny and sort of the anti-hero, but I'd say overall not quite as charming. I'll lift that dark line just a touch and then redo some of that. Just in time for my neighbors to slam dishes around. Does anybody else have neighbors that do that? That wash their dishes like they're angry? And what are they using? Pyrex? Why doesn't it shatter? It's if anyone doesn't know, I'm drawing in San Francisco. We live in the city, like in the city proper. And even just drawing on a daily basis, it makes me miss having a house like we did when we lived in Austin. Just the amount of noise that is constantly happening in an apartment building in a city like this. It's really old construction. It seems just inescapable in any room. Which for a guy like me, I'm a big fan of kind of powering down in silence, especially after I draw or after I work. And it is so far mostly impossible here. Almost have to live with noise canceling headphones in. There's definitely sounds that I miss from Texas, like locusts or cicadas. And not that I miss the heat at all, but I don't know if anyone else will relate to this, but when it is, I wouldn't say like dangerously hot, but when it is hotter than your average day anywhere else, as it is in Texas a lot of the time, there's a kind of silence that comes along with that. It's pretty much a lot of the wildlife is sort of waiting to come out at night when it's more bearable. So if you're walking around in the right area, it is very quiet, especially if you're out in the country. But even in little pockets in the city, it was like that. And you can't find that here. Which it's odd. We've been here for over 3 years. And the things that I miss about Texas are things I never really thought about when I was there, despite having traveled for a living for most of my life. It's just stuff on the day-to-day that you don't think about. I think other funny things that I miss about Texas, which is a sentence I never thought I would utter. I'm bald, so I wear a hat most of the time just to avoid sunburns, skin cancer, and all the risks. And I'm from Texas, so I have many wide brim hats, like classic Stetsons. I wouldn't necessarily say a cowboy hat, but some traditional Texan hats. And a lot of the people around here that have no style or decorum or anything just stare. And even a few nights ago, I went out with one of my buddies here after dinner, and we caught two people trying to take photos with us in the background of it. And then when they saw us looking, they apologized and kind of ran out of the bar. And that's a weird thing. Oddly enough, in that bar, they were playing 90s country. It's not even a country bar. It's just kind of odd. I do miss that you can walk around and nobody cares what hat you have on in Texas, because it's kind of just part of most people's lives that somebody's wearing a big hat. Let's see. Jess Lily said something you should do is a tutorial on how to draw noses. I could do that. I mean, the most basic thing that I would say, at some point I will make a shorter video about that. But the most basic thing is no hard lines until you define the nostrils. So much of what brings the face off of the page is the depth in the shadow, like the drop shadow that the nostrils create. And something else I've talked about before is defining where your lighting source is coming from, because that dictates where you will have heavier shadows. As an example, he has a heavier shadow right here that I'll work on, but it's on his actual nostril. Whereas on this side, because the light is more coming from this direction, oops, a little shake to the camera there. The light's coming from the right side of my page, so it would cast a deeper shadow here. It also changes according to the person's face. You know, if they've ever had like a broken nose, like I've drawn John Barenthal before, and he's had his nose busted a few times, and so light falls on him differently. Same with Owen Wilson, which maybe Owen Wilson's another one I should do. That's he's like, I think, one of my favorite people to draw. I've never drawn him large before, but I love a good busted up nose. A lot of geography to work with. But the other thing is, in general, when I do my portraits, I start right here, not at the tip of the nose, but at the very bottom, sort of the nape of the nose where it touches the top of someone's upper lip. And then start moving. Since I'm right-handed, I go from here to this side, and then I'll start to shape this nostril, and according to my reference, I will measure from the edge of this nostril to this one and see if I've got it approximately right, and then I just lightly add contour. But I will do a more in-depth video about that if people want to hear that, or if just since you requested it, I will make one. I certainly have a lot of examples of it, but as simple as this sounds, if you want to get more into photoreal or just accurate drawings, regardless of whether you're drawing in graphite or ink, the main thing that I would say is get a reference photo that's equal to the size of what you're drawing, and measure out your points from edge to edge on the nose, and then from the very bottom right here, where the distance between here and the eye line. If you measure those things and you get them kind of marked out, then measure the width of the eye and mark those. And then once you have that, measure from this corner to this corner, then measure the width of this and mark that. And typically, if you get those three fixtures in the face correct, whether it's like some of my other portraits where they have a more lined face or facial hair, or if it's a drawing of a woman, what makes people look more photoreal is getting the distance of the nostrils, the distance of the eyes, and all of that kind of in a correlation, essentially finding the triangle between the three. Even if you slightly miss it, it's one of those things where, say that if they appeared to be slightly closer together than they are in the reference photo, it actually will give the impression that they're tilting their face up or down rather than a total miss. Like just critiquing this, I'm about to address it just by adding some more contour, but I probably could have made the bridge of his nose slightly longer, just a millimeter of difference and where this all falls, but because I didn't, it looks more like his chin is tilted slightly at an angle compared to the reference photo I'm using. But yeah, the nose and the eyes, I mean, if you get those right, everything else is pretty easy. Or easier, I should say. And then the other thing about just technical aspects of this type of drawing, or any drawing really, is to work slow. Take your time with it. You know, a lot of presence, kind of focusing on what I'm doing. That's why I like to use graphite, because it's less of like a stressful experience of, if I mess up, I can just go back and erase it or build around it. Sometimes I have little happy accidents, which is I think that is a literal Bob Ross quote. So you're welcome to all those Bob Ross fans. Which I've had several people the last couple weeks mention Bob Ross to me, that I should do more of a presentation like he did. And I started thinking how little I actually knew about Bob Ross. And the first thing that was shocking to me is that he was born and raised in Florida, and I guess lived there for most of his life. Just never thought of Bob Ross as a Floridian. No offense to people from Florida, but even my family that lives there, I feel like the family reunions, we can all tell which ones are from Texas and Florida. Oh yeah, Bob Ross is the best. Love him. Speaking, I was talking about Owen Wilson a couple minutes ago. He did that film that's sort of loosely based on Bob Ross a little bit. The character is definitely modeled after him. And I was pleasantly surprised that I liked that film. It's a little off color, but I think it's what you would expect from like a more dramedy from Owen Wilson. But I'm pretty sure Bob Ross, if I'm remembering correctly, unless it's just from a meme or something, I'm pretty sure he used to say happy accidents, which make a lot more sense now that I paint and draw. I understand what he means. I do feel like there's a bit of like a void of the world not having people like Bob Ross, like calming figures, you know? Nolan is back. The return of Nolan. Isn't that a Metallica song, I Return, or something like that? Like, later, less cool Metallica? I think that's probably an older reference than most of the demographic that watches these. I think they did it for like a Mission Impossible movie or something. The music video had lots of planes. I'm going to draw something. I know it's slightly off camera, but I didn't want to change the frame for the sake of the time lapse that I'll make out of this later. Just want to get the feathering of his hair accurate over here. Which in the future, when I draw this large, I'll scoot the camera back and be able to see a little bit more of my desk. I'm assuming because most of the streams that I do, when I have done landscape or horizontal streams, a lot of people don't watch compared to vertical, which I assume everyone's really just looking at their phone screens rather than on like a TV or an iPad. But you never know. Maybe I'll just do 1 or 2 of those a week. This makes 24 days in a row of drawing at the same time. And then a lot of what I'm going to do today before I get sidetracked is I need to build out his hair, which I've mentioned it pretty much all week. I'm tired of drawing hair, but I haven't really found a lot of subjects that I want to draw that don't have hair or aren't wearing a hat or something, so. I'll catch up on the chat here in a second. I've talked about this a little bit, but these black wing pencils, this is really when they're, I think, at least for this extra firm one that I'm using, which is the same as the 602, this is when they're at their best. Otherwise, if you need like a really fine edge on them, I feel like the graphite that they have that holds that well is a little too unforgiving, so you get a lot of page gouges. The other factor of this portrait that I haven't really taken into account is that he's got stubble. And I feel like when I leave stubble out, it doesn't look quite right. So brace yourselves for a lot of really boring stippling effect. Let's see. Oh, thanks. Looks like my dad is in the chat. Everyone say hi, Dad. You'd second that, Nolan? Is that a relative to the god himself? Oh yeah, I see. I'm confused. Yes, that is. What were you seconding? Did I miss more than I thought? Yeah, at some point I need to, I have an OBS account. I need to hook up monitors and stuff, so, oh, thanks. Appreciate that. That way I can actually see a feed of everything that's happening in front of me. Because right now I'm essentially drawing with my head to the left of my phone while it's on this tripod. Which again, if anyone's curious like about the drawing setup, don't get a canvas lamp. They're garbage. It's essentially like hooking your camera to a bunch of bungee cords. So even if I shade a little bit too hard, it'll shake everything. So I notice pretty much anytime that happens, people start to bail from watching. But they, in theory, they were great. I think if you had like a concrete floor, or if you were able to attach the canvas tripod to a better fixture, it would be better. But even then, I've attached it to framework in our last apartment, and if our neighbor walked upstairs, it would shake, which is probably a testament to the old architecture as well as the actual tripod itself. But it's spring-loaded to maintain tension, and it's I don't recommend it. I feel like you're better off getting an actual tripod and then locking it down so it doesn't shake. But all that said, eventually I'll have a monitor up so I can see more of what's going on in the chat. Kind of in line with what I was talking about, because I've got some folks that are wanting to do essentially live shows while I draw them, which is why no one has seen the Dylan LeBlanc videos yet, aside from the fact that he was in Norway and his phone got shut off when he came back to the States. But we wanted to do something where it was a little bit more of a setup. Oh, really? That's cool. I try not to watch the view count because I feel like it, not that I'm superstitious, but there is a bit of a jinx that happens. At the highest it's been, I felt like I needed to draw something more specifically. I started drawing more on the eyes when that happened, and then it dropped off. I think also, I've mentioned it before, but once people get in there and they realize I'm not telling, like, here's a hack for this, they bail. No hacks, just lots of time, lots of patience. But, oh, that's cool. I mean, the whole idea is to build some community and have people talk. I really started to think about drawing live for all the reasons I talked about before, just like a little bit of personal accountability to stick with one style for a longer period of time. But I had gotten the idea because one of the few people that I have a bunch of sort of like music world overlap with, he has a, I guess you'd call it a show, I don't really know. It's called What Makes This Song Stink. It's kind of him not doing a parody of Rick Beato, but talking about really popular songs that stink. And during pandemic days, he used to do midnight drums, and he would sign on at midnight and see who else had drums that they could play. And the joke was that it was kind of always out of sync because it was either on YouTube or Instagram. But he, for a while, he was doing live streams that a while back before we moved to San Francisco, I jumped into a few of them and essentially like helped him in this whole series of videos. And I kind of like the idea that he just goes on and talks about nothing. I mean, there's no important message. It's just nonsense and people talking about good and bad music. But yeah, if anyone is into music, his name's Pat Finnerty. He's worth following. He's a funny guy. What's up, Rogue the Bat? But that guy Pat is also, he's like just a human jukebox. If you mention any song, good or bad, he knows all of it, and he plays a bunch of stuff. Actually, Nolan, this is relevant to you. He's a Philly guy. He that band I told you about, Dr. Dog, he shares a practice space with them. But he does like local Philly shows and plays with some bands out there. They do like a really good Tom Petty tribute night once a month. Which I think that like probably sounds highly unappealing, but all the guys that are in the bands that he kind of cobbles together are really great. Like a lot of the guys from Dr. Dog show up and play with them. And he's also just a funny dude as well, but his live streams are some of my favorites to watch. Do I pronounce the J? It's not Rogue, it's Rouge. How do I say it? Rouge? Rouge. Like lipstick and rouge? Like the makeup color? Oh, okay, that makes more sense. It makes me think of It's a deep cut reference I imagine not a single person will get. There's a Kevin Costner movie called The War. It's when Elijah Wood was a pretty young kid. And every time they see something that needs to be fixed up, he always says lipstick and rouge. And that's all it needs is some lipstick and rouge. I know this is kind of slow going. I'm basically just biding time until I have to start fixing his hair. How do you gain XP? The only way that I understand that is if people talk back to you or if you chat a lot. Like Nolan right now, he's number 3, but if you look back, I think number 1 is someone that was speaking another language and they just put a lot of messages in the chat. And I think it goes up if you get people responding directly to you. To be honest, the only lives that I ever interact with are the ones I was telling you about that Finnerty does. Which actually I've got animation I did for him that's a little farther back in my shorts column. So there's like some older, like cartoony drawings that I did for him. Oh, cool. Thanks, Nolan. No, unless it's the ones that Lily was saying, I think it might be farther up. It was the very first few that were in the chat. I have no clue what language it was. I thought German at first, and then the more I saw it, I thought maybe not. Turkish. Oh, cool. One of the oldest civilizations. I've always wanted to go to Turkey. I actually have Turkish friends here in the city. I'm wondering timeline, not timeline, but time zones, where they are right now. Just trying to think of geographically. It's got to be really early there, right? So this is kind of where the Blackwing pencils fall apart a little bit. The more you have to keep an edge on them, you just have to grind all the wood off of them, which is good for graphite, bad for the life of the pencil. Which I have like this sort of graveyard of little Blackwing pencils. Like that's probably the longest of the short ones I have. Which I've talked a lot about these. It's the Blackwing 71s. It's the Frank Lloyd Wright series. And they're marked extra firm, but honestly, they're more of like a medium HB. Nice. What's the other stream? Rob the Master. What does that guy do? He said, "What is this, bro? Draw me, brother. Draw me at one, so you can draw me, please, brother." Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you again, Nolan. You've become like the unofficial moderator here. I feel like when they're written like that, it's hard to tell the tone of it. It's like a positive heckle, like for comedians, you know. Thanks, man. It's funny. Half of the time on yesterday's stream, there was a guy talking named Travis, which is my older brother's name. And with some of the questions he was asking me, I thought it was my brother, like trying to tee me up to talk about stuff, and it ended up being a completely random dude. And then my dad popped up a little while ago. So it's just kind of like, it's funny because I thought my brother was the one talking. But I'm positive of screen names today. Oh yeah, Rouge, what does Rob the Master do if you're still in here? Curious what my competition is. Oh, not really, sure. Catching bad people on, okay. Like fraud prevention type stuff, or like America's Most Wanted type stuff? Oh, nice. That's cool. That's it's actually similar to what my wife does, but she does it for like privately for companies. I also have a friend, he's a director in LA that is obsessed with that type of stuff. He yeah, so there's a different brand of this. What my wife does is like fraud prevention, but the guy Gil that I was talking about, great guy, good director. He made that movie The Wave, if you're curious about him. He's obsessed with those channels and always wants to talk about that, like catching people and then tapping into like their cameras, and you know, if I watch any of that, I'll lose my mind out of paranoia. Just the capabilities people have of hacking and all that. But yeah, I get it though. I've seen some YouTube shows where they talk about that stuff. I was talking about this yesterday. I feel like I deal more in like escapism, like drawing movie characters, drawing musicians. Trying to forget the woes of the world, or whatever, however you want to put it. All right. What does that mean? Like I assume that means like someone who does like positive hacking. My brain, it shows my age, but the first thing I thought was like Vanilla Ice, like a white rapper. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I'm all about that. I feel like a lot of companies get a they get a pass on some of that stuff. Um, we've had issues personally with some Wi-Fi companies who have like obvious scams that are going on that are known issues, and they just get away with it because they're, they are who they are. Sort of like no moral center or ethical code to the companies. But yeah, I support that. I wish more people would get into that side of things. Hopefully, if anyone takes anything away from this live stream, it's that they'll remember that you said white hacker and I thought white rapper. And sadly, the first rapper that came to mind is Vanilla Ice. And obviously, there's Eminem and Beastie Boys. I guess Beck could fall into that category for his early albums. This is the, I think, second or third one in a row where they have a really shocking lack of eyelashes. The Johnny Depp drawing that I did, he had no eyebrows or eyelashes. I'm just assuming it's all come off with all the prosthetics that he's had to wear. Some technical stuff here. So if you're working on drawing eyes, if you're drawing off of a photo reference, you really have to establish and understand where your lighting source is coming from, so you can get the drop shadow right. Otherwise, they end up really flat. You said you don't know many musicians by name. I could name a lot of musicians by name, but it's one of the most useless things I can do. I could even rattle off like musicians that played on people's albums that no one really knows about. Like session players are sort of like the same thing as tracking like baseball stats for me. I wish there was a TV show. That's a whole different avenue, but I've always wanted to make a game show. Have the concept and everything. Would be very happy to host that. Maybe that'll be a thing in the future. I really love a game show that has no point. Like not a Wheel of Fortune, but more of like where the rules constantly change. A good example is Taskmaster. Who said I can tell exactly what song is which of my plays based on for a second. Yeah, I can do like a similar thing. I feel like it just takes a certain type of time spent listening, or I've mentioned it a bunch before, but I used to play music for a living, so just kind of surrounded by it all the time. But occasionally I'd have bandmates that were let's see, Megalovania. I don't know what that is. Is that like is that a music reference, like a modern one? I think, Nolan, you were saying the other day you listen to mostly older music, right? Yeah, I'm similar to that, in terms of like I'll hear little bits and pieces, or I'll hear something walking through a store, and even with all the noise, I can tell like, oh, that's a good example is if I ever hear like Hunt Sales playing drums on anything, I can always tell you it's him. mainly because his drums always sound so specific. If y'all don't know who that is, that's the drummer that played Lust for Life. He was Iggy Pop's drummer for a while. He and his brother were both in the band. Or just like little random things. I mean, that's a really obvious one because he's got such a specific sound. It's a video game song. Oh yeah, so I don't really play video games, so I would be at a loss. However, I do like one of my oldest friends from touring is one of the guys that made all the music for the live play for Halo. And that's some video game music that I recognize because I've listened to it pretty in depth. Actually, I know two of the guys that worked on separate parts of that, but I'm pretty sure Alex, my friend, he's the one that did all the live play composition. Yeah, there's weird ones where I also hear, like if I hear a song and I can tell what song they basically lifted to make it, especially with modern music, I can't unhear the old song. And so I'll point it out to people and no one ever cares. But it is one of those things. If I'm also in a restaurant and I can hear like the hi-hats starting a certain thing, or I don't know. I can also pick out gear pretty well on recordings. It's like I don't know what use that has. Yeah, I also just like in general, lots of movie trivia, lots of music trivia. Like a really, to me, it's kind of an obvious one, but one that always sort of blows my mind. If you ever listen to Boss Skaggs, like probably his most well-known song is "The Lowdown." It's got like one of the coolest bass and drum grooves, and it's kind of like if disco was cooler, you know, and less disco-y. They were recording in the same studio as Michael Jackson at the time. I know, taboo, but for the sake of the story. And he liked that they were playing that groove, and then they ended up playing, I think it's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. If you listen to him, it's the exact same groove in a different key. And that he just like bought out their studio time so they would come over and be his band for certain sessions. But it's stuff like that where I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I also have music playing in one ear, but I'll hear little things like that and I'll have to go and look it up. Like, oh, was this, you know, so-and-so on drums, or was this, like, that guitar part sounds very specifically like this guitar player. I think, like, the ingredients, being able to pick those out in food might be more useful than trying to get everyone's attention at a restaurant to let them know I know who the bass player is on a song. At least you can tell people what dish they would like, you know, if you can pick out stuff that you know they like, or if you want to recreate something at home. Another one is Foley for movies, which is like the soundscape. So like any sound you hear in a film, for the most part, it didn't happen live. It's all added by a Foley artist, like footsteps, like opening and closing doors. And there's a pet peeve that I have with that. You can hear it in so many things, but it's the stock sound of a door, a heavy door on hinges opening or closing, and it is always the same sound. And I know this because I also have that stock sound. It's in pretty much every library. And I'll hear it and I just feel like I would have rather them put a little effort into going and opening and closing a door. Or there's one example I can think of in particular where there's overlap. There's the train sound. It's a UK train horn. You can hear it in Green Street Hooligans when they're all arguing in the parking lot about going to the away game. It's the exact same sample that they used in Hot Fuzz when he's traveling to whatever the small village is, Sanford, Gloucestershire. The reason I know it's the same one is because it's not just a sample of the train, which those could sound similar, but it's the delay and the reverb that they added to it to make it sound like it's in the distance. Yeah, that is true in terms of telling people who are picky with music, like stuff that they would like. That is something I try not to do a whole lot because I will like start over suggesting things to people. But if there's certain things that people like, I can usually suggest a handful of bands that they may not have heard. That's a little bit of what I've done on here. I know I recommended Dr. Dog to you. I think they're pretty well known, but I just thought of it because you mentioned that you were in PA. And I think like in terms of modern bands, they might be one of the best ones. There's also, I mean, there's a ton of bands that came out of there that were great. The Teeth are also another great Philly band. I don't even know if they play anymore, but man, were they good. And I think they were all on the sort of smaller Philly label Park the Van, which for a brief moment, one of my bands had like a little talk with them, trying to work with them, which I wish we had just to say that we were in the same company, but I was outvoted. There's also like another one that I always think about as guitar players, like guitar tone and all that's really easy to pick out. But there's a few people, like if I ever hear Ian Moore, it's a dude from Austin that lives in the Pacific Northwest now, kind of splits his time. He has such a specific sound that I can hear a couple notes and know it's him, even though he plays kind of like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like white guy blues, white boy blues. It's just got that really like stiff guitar tone. Usually has a really great custom amp. But especially with like older tracks, super easy to pick out by guitar or drums for me. But even just like live stuff, you can tell the difference in Billy Gibbons' tone from just about anybody else because he not only has really specific tone, which that's the guitar player from ZZ Top, if anyone doesn't know, but he plays incredibly light gauge strings. So it's just little stuff like that. I've also heard it from side stage a few times, which I feel like it kind of imprints your brain. A few guys that I've done that with, like Gary Clark Jr. is another one. I don't even think it's his playing. I think it's the setup of his guitar and amps. But we played some shows with them a while ago, and I think like the funniest thing about that band, if anyone likes blues or anything, Gary's great, really sweet guy, but the best guitar player in his band is Zapata, the guy that wears the big hat and the coats. I mean, he is, and everyone knows it. Gary even says it, but he's not very loud in the house mix, so you don't really get to hear a ton of him when they're playing live. He's kind of more for stage feel. But he also has some very specific tone. If he's ever playing at the Continental in Austin, you can always tell before you get upstairs. I think another sort of unsung hero of that world is Jim Oblin. He's got like such specific guitar tone, but one of the coolest things about him is that he was Paul Simon's drummer live for over a decade. and then they stopped playing live, I think, because of Paul Simon's hearing. And Jim, I mean, he's got a lot of recordings, but I had never heard him until I saw a live video of him. Hands down, one of the most talented guitar players I've ever seen. And he's more well known for being a drummer. Like, not even a drummer for a band that he wrote with. He's just like a touring road dog kind of guy. But he's another guy, if I hear about 3 notes, it's easy to tell. He said, it's definitely Brad, but the eyes and forehead looks like Val Kilmer. Looks great, thanks. Yeah, it's part of that is because I'm pretty sure he's wearing a hairpiece, because it's Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth. I was talking about this the other day in the reference photo. When, like, I've noticed this in films and can't unsee it. When someone's hairline is like that, it's because it's glued or laced in, and his is perfectly straight. So even though it looks like his hair, I'm pretty sure they pulled it down past his hairline, because he has a bit of a widow's peak right here. So it kind of makes him look like that. But he also has feathered hair, so it's kind of like similar to the traditional Val Kilmer cut. And then he also has sideburns, so I think Val Kilmer had those in the Doors film and Tombstone, so it's kind of, I see why you would think that. All right, speaking of hair, let's dig in, because is that an alt account or just a lucky name? What's that? So with hair and stuff on this, I've mentioned this a lot, so if you've already been watching, bear with me for a second. I don't really like to talk about art unless people ask me about it. Otherwise I get pretty mind-numbingly bored. With hair, especially if I'm doing a photoreal portrait, what I try to do is more of the blocking of certain shapes in the hair, and then I'll go in and add stuff. But I try, mainly for the sake of anyone watching, to not shade in the hair as much, because then with the diffused lights that I'm using, you get too much of a graphite glare, so it starts to look like they're sort of out of balance. But yeah, while I'm working on hair, feel free to bring up anything else, or I'll just keep rambling. This, I've said it a bunch before, but the hair is usually my least favorite part. Sort of the tedium of trying to get like enough of the recognizable details in there. You said sounds like something cool to do for a greasy hairdresser person. Yeah. And maybe that's a whole line of other live streams, is talking hair, drawing hair. Have an actual hairdresser on. I'm also trying to be mindful, because I know that y'all can't see some of the wider spots of his hair right now. But even as an example, if what I'm seeing in the playback is close to what you're seeing, this is actually much darker in person. So like even the glare from the lights with the diffusers and the barn doors is kind of eating at some of the detail there. It's another reason why some of the times I like to spare everyone the sort of boring part of this part of the drawing, you know. It usually reflects in the view count as well. It's just dropped. That's not what we're here for, so it doesn't matter. He's also, it's kind of interesting. I'm wondering for this photo shoot in particular, because he's top lit as much as he's front lit, but he's front lit from one side, so it's almost like a Yusuf Karsh portrait in color, which if anyone wants to see like some of the greatest photos and portraits of all time, Yusuf Karsh is the guy. It's one of my all-time favorites. I've actually drawn a lot off of his stuff as well. He usually worked with a 2 or a 3-point lighting system, and so he had a lot of fall off. Like he took the famous portrait of Ernest Hemingway in the sort of sailor's sweater, but he also, I mean, he took photos of everybody. It's kind of astonishing when you start to look through everyone he's taken a portrait of, but it's photos that just about anyone will recognize. And then there's one of my just in general favorite photos of all time. It's not really like a photography masterpiece or anything, but it's Ansel Adams and Yusuf Karsh hanging out, and they are wearing each other's hats, just like kind of goofing around, which is sort of funny to think about because most of the time you think of both of those guys in a really serious setting. Which, if people don't know who Ansel Adams is, he's another one worth looking up. He's also from out here in the Bay Area, and famous for his landscapes and documenting Yosemite. So he has some really, really famous photos that just about anyone would recognize. But also in terms of photography, he's someone that should, I think, inspire people. I talked about this the other day, so kind of continuing a thought, but a lot of photography now is just celebrated for the fact of being on film, regardless of whether it's good. It's kind of discouraged me from putting as much effort into photography as I have in the last 20 years. But everyone is on this big movement of no editing, straight to film. If it's digital, it's trash. If you edit, that's dumb. It's kind of like a general vibe that has taken over a lot of the photography community. And Ansel Adams, one of the greatest photographers of all time, which is not really, that's not just my opinion, that's a general opinion of most people. He's been featured in some of the greatest museums in the world. He used to dodge and burn his photos. So there's famous photos he's taken in Yosemite, and he burned the road out of them because he wanted it to just be landscape and not the man-made elements of Yosemite. Hopefully I said Yosemite. I was just thinking Yellowstone. But he was editing photos all the way back then. You know, and that's in a dark room. So he was doing like a traditional dodge and burn. There was no Photoshop. So, but going back to talking about him and Yusuf Karsh, there's a great photo of them just kind of playing around, wearing each other's hats, because Ansel Adams he was another guy that always had a Stetson, or I think a Resistol, if I'm remembering correctly. And then Yusuf Karsh is a little bit more traditional, so he always had like a long brim fedora. Basically just talking about anything that's not hair related at the moment, because this is, as I've said before, my least favorite part of the drawings is starting to get all the reflective surfaces and detail in the hair. Yeah, I was lucky enough to see Ansel Adams, all of his work, or most of his work, at the Dion Museum out here in San Francisco. And a lot of it's shockingly small, and it was a lot of the sizes he chose to print. And it had like little plaques saying this is his preferred size to display this image, so it wasn't a design decision by the museum. It says, were you outside during the black moon at all? I actually wasn't. I was kind of sad about that because I knew about it and just had the wrong day, and I think if I'm not mistaken I was working on portraits, so I was just in like a dark bedroom. Sort of missed out on a epic experience. But to be fair, where we are in the city, a lot of the time when there's harvest moons and anything like that, we can't see it. When we first moved here, we had to kind of walk through the neighborhood and figure out, because it wasn't the harvest moon, it was the, I'm trying to remember what it was. All I can think is Nick Drake. It was like a pink moon. But I had seen all these photos from previous years where it's sort of framed next to Coit Tower. And I was looking up to see, like, in the charts, would it still be in a similar place that time of year, you know? And we couldn't, it was kind of, made me feel a little bit crazy because we couldn't find the moon because it was a low rise full moon and it was really colorful. And then the next day I saw a bunch of people that went to, I think it's Bush Street. Yeah, maybe Strawberry Moon, that might be the one. They went, I think it's Bush or Canal, it's one of those streets kind of in the financial, like bordering up against the financial district here. And they got these great photos of it, if I remember correctly, intersecting with the Bay Bridge. But it's a little weird. It's one thing I don't really love about living in a dense city is that you really do have to know where to go for just basic stuff, like where to see the moon on certain nights, you know. And there's, of course, like big open areas, but we didn't know, you know, when we first moved here, we weren't sure exactly where to go and walk and find a vantage point. But the trade-offs have been cool because I've gotten to do a lot of Golden Gate specific photography. Like one of my favorite shots that I've ever taken was passing under the Golden Gate as the fog was rolling in. And I've seen a lot of people try to sort of capture the same thing, and I've yet to see exactly where I caught it. Just like right time of day, right film stock, you know, enough experience to know what to compensate for. Not to say that there's not other good photos, but it's just a vantage point I haven't really seen until I captured it. It's easily the best photo I've taken, might be best that I ever will take. I feel like since then it's been mostly diminishing returns. You said you're out on a bumpkin, so you hardly have any light pollution. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I grew up. I was out of West Texas for the most part, so the tallest building was not very big, you know, so you could kind of see every direction. And then in high school I lived out in the country, which was nice. You could see satellites flying over and all kinds of stuff like that, so it was a little bit more of like a normal thing to be able to look up and actually see stuff going on. Here, even with the light pollution, on really dark nights, we just have so much fog that rolls in. You kind of lose sense of the sky. It's a little maddening. Like the artist retreat that I went on earlier this year was out to southern Louisiana, and I was on a farm for 2 weeks. And there were a bunch of nights. It was very cold when I was there. I mean, most nights it was in the 20s, but I would get my coat and everything on, and I'd just go out and stare for a long time. It was like I was deprived of actually seeing stars and just sort of a non-light polluted sky, which, I don't know, I think there's a lot to that. Definitely got like some of the deepest sleep of my life when I was there. There's this sort of mess at the top of his hair that I'm gonna diminish it a little bit, but like I've said 1,000 times, the only part of drawing I don't actually fully enjoy. Just hate drawing hair. But I don't want that to reflect in the final product, so. Too far in now, I gotta commit. It's also a little weird because I'm drawing strictly in medium graphite, so no color. And the reflective parts of his hair up here are going to be tough to emulate, but I'll probably go in and do some mono zero erasing to do that. Just want to get this like one band of hair in there. How's it going? Is your name Lily? I've been calling you that because I assume that's your name from the screen name. Yeah, it is funny to draw this. Now that I'm looking at it, there's no way this isn't a hairpiece. Which is funny because in the film, the sort of, I'd say the most famous scene of the film when he doesn't fight but kind of spars with Bruce Lee, he's wearing a bad wig that's meant to look like Rick Dalton's hair, and he takes it off and I think he puts it on like the antenna of the truck he's sitting on, which means that he's wearing like a wig on a wig. Which reminds me like when I was in bands and somebody would come up with an idea that we didn't really like or it felt like it was too much, we used to say it's a hat on a hat. We don't need two hats, you know? But some people need two hats. Billy Gibbons wears two hats. Billy Bob Thornton. A lot of Billies with the double hat. That's a funny one. If anyone knows who Billy Bob Thornton is, I would assume most people do, but he did a series of interviews earlier this year for a terrible show. It's another one. I'm kind of like firmly in the camp of not being into Taylor Sheridan stuff now, which I used to like. I mean, I still like Hell or High Water, but when Billy Bob Thornton did the press for that, he wore a big saggy beanie, like he was gonna go play in like a jam band afterwards, and the beanie itself had an earring where his ear would normally be. Like the hat was pierced. There's something about like I don't know, because I think Billy Bob Thornton, I'm assuming he is actually, I don't know if he's from Texas. I told a story about playing, or almost playing a show with him. He kicked us off the stage before we ever got to play. I assume he's a Texan. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but to see him dressed in full like Johnny Depp pirate attire promoting a show about Texas oilmen there's just a weird layer of comedy to that I don't think was intentional. I feel like everyone in the press that's sitting with him is a little confused as well. But yeah, just made me think of it. It's also kind of odd because he still has hair, unless he's just gotten really wispy hair pieces that he wears, which I feel fully at liberty to talk about because I'm bald. So no one can say that I'm unqualified to talk about hair pieces and baldness. Which in general, actually, being in some of the bands I was in, there were people that we knew that had full stick-on, like month or two long hair pieces. Some relatively well-known people had them. I always thought that was funny. I just felt like, just commit and go bald. It looks better. Actually, when I did have hair, I had longer hair for a while. And the reason I committed to just being a bald guy is because one of the bands I was in had a stylist that was hired to help us. And in like a 10-second span, she was like, "You're too hard drummer, you're chubby, your jeans are too small." And then she pointed at me and said, "You're going bald, shave your head." And it was one of those things of like having to double check, like, am I? And then I feel like it's never been the same since. Makes me feel really endeared to shows like Breaking Bad, where there's so many bald characters. Like I feel like a thing a lot of people didn't really like, I don't know, appreciate as much as all the like the time and like the dangerous sun for all the bald guys. Like Walter having to wrap a t-shirt around his head. It's a real thing. You get sunburnt real quick when you don't have hair. Is that Riz? What does that mean? I feel like this is where I show my age. I'm not. I don't know, when I hear Riz, I think of Wu-Tang Clan. Like RZA. Oh, I see. Charisma. I mean, it's a Gen Z thing. Otherwise, meaning romance. Is what romance? The stylist? Oh no, it was not Riz in that sense. It was a stylist brought on by a label that was like courting our band, and we were kind of like, I guess an up and coming band at the time. It was a long time ago. I mean, this is to tell you how long ago this was. We did not have smartphones. We used to have to print out maps from MapQuest and use a highlighter to know where we were driving. No, it was a label that was courting us, and they brought on a stylist to help us look cool. And it was definitely not flirting. It was soul crushing and kind of like blunt and mean. So, but in retrospect, she was right. I was going bald, and our drummer was chubby. And it wouldn't have mattered, but we were all wearing like, it was before they made skinny jeans for guys. So we were all literally wearing girl jeans. Which is funny to think about now because I'm on such the other end of that. But yeah, it might have been sweeter. I might have received it better if it was someone flirting. Instead, I feel like it was a quarter-life crisis moment of, oh no, am I going bald? And then having to be on stage most nights after that. which is, it's a whole nother thing. Within bands, there's sort of archetypes of not just like personalities, but there's types of styles. And you never want to be the lonely hat guy. So like it's kind of like a faux pas. Like I've played bass in bands, I've played guitar and drums, I've played keys and drums, I've sang in all of them. You never want to be the bass player wearing a flat cap like a newsy hat. It just sort of has the feel of like a, I don't know, like a little bit insecure, like I'm not failing, you're failing, that kind of vibe. But I was every once in a while. I did have some flat caps. And then luckily I ended up in a band where I wasn't the only guy wearing a hat, because we had a lot of like Stetsons on stage, so not exactly cowboy hats, but not a cowboy hat. More like open roads, if anyone knows what those are. Kind of a traditional like Hank Williams hat. The presidential hat. Not the current one, like the classic one. The one that LBJ wore, and Eisenhower, and a lot of the old fellas. FDR wore one as well. A lot of guys in like the World War II era wore them. I actually have a great photo of my wife's grandfather post World War II wearing like the most beat up open road Stetson that I've ever seen. The first thing I asked was, do they still have that hat? Anyway, I feel like I'm on like a bad podcast right now. Live at 5 with Trevor, talk about hair and hats. So I can also tell because the chat has slowed down drastically. Oh, I appreciate that. I feel like it's because I listen to so many podcasts that when I was drawing in silence, I felt the urge to talk. Because it's, you know, like I've said before, there's too much noise in our building to promote these as drawing ASMR, because it's kind of like drawing with occasional dishes and loud neighbors. Who am I going to draw next? I don't know yet. I have a gallery of portrait references, and I've talked about it a little bit, but I mainly try to draw people that I have some sort of interest in. Like I was mentioning with Cliff Booth in particular, like this Brad Pitt character. It's one of my favorite Tarantino films, and one of my favorite characters that he's played and that Tarantino's written. But so far in the series, I've drawn Tom Hardy, Joaquin Phoenix, Josh Brolin, Johnny Depp, and Brad Pitt. So I've kind of been doing like the leading man thing, which I think mainly, you know, honestly, you're the second person that's recommended drawing Bob Ross this week, so maybe I need to. That's a lot of hair, though. Speaking of not liking drawing hair, that's a double beard. But maybe, you know, it's curlier hair, so there is a little bit of forgiveness, because you can do scribble method for curly hair. I think the real challenge with Bob Ross is finding a truly HD image of him that I don't have to go in and like alter myself to make it high resolution. Usually when I do that, it just softens so many of the features that I really focus on. But yeah, Bob Ross is a good suggestion, and it kind of breaks away from the leading man thing, which I've been wanting to do. A lot of the time I draw these, though, because it's also a reference point for people, so they can kind of see at a glance who I'm drawing and know who it is. Lets me know that I'm still like on point and not losing touch with the ability to draw photoreal people. And then definitely before this next bit of travel that I'm about to do, when my live stream time will change, I kind of want to get like a few of like the bigger, more recognized people done, because I think while I'm traveling, I might be live streaming drawing locals and people that I meet on the trip. So I feel like those, which I've done before, I've done some live streams where I've already drawn one of the subjects that I'm going to be giving a portrait to on the trip. I did a ballpoint pen portrait of him, or a couple of them actually. Those I think are a little bit less recognizable at a glance, and so I think their attention sort of wanes a little bit, but kind of like in line with what I've been saying since I started this, it's not exactly about trying to maintain the viewers. It's more about me drawing something that I'm enjoying drawing, and if people want to talk or ask questions, or so long as it's nice, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, Bob Ross is a good suggestion. It's like a nice recognizable face. I've been thinking about Owen Wilson. I like a lot of his not so much his like rom-coms, but like his Wes Anderson stuff, and he's one of those guys that has a lot of sort of facial geography is the nice way to put it. Favorite type of pizza? New York style. I actually could talk at length about this because it's a thing that we used to do on tour, was we'd look for the best pizza. I think New York style is pizza. Like when I have Neapolitan style, I don't really love it. I always feel hungry afterwards. It's just like something about the lighter dough. And then I like a foldable pizza. As a guy with a beard, I'm just mindful of what I'm eating because it's going to get all over my beard and my mustache. But I like classic New York, big greasy pepperoni pizza. I'll do cheese every once in a while. Also true to like a New York style, I do like hot sauce, like not a flavored hot sauce, just a hot sauce, like a little dab of that on the pizza, which if anyone hasn't been to New York, that's a thing. Every table has hot sauce on it. I've never seen it anywhere but there. But I have like heated opinions about pizza because I don't like deep dish. It's not pizza. Like I want to say it's Lou Malnati's. It's one of the famous Chicago pizza places. And unintentionally, I'd had a few drinks, and I was out with a band. It was like a celebratory dinner. And I didn't know he was the owner, and he said, "What do you think?" Because somebody had told him I liked New York pizza, and I was into that. And I didn't know who he was, and I was younger, a little lit up, and I said, "Well, this is lasagna. It's really good lasagna," and he was not happy. So I'm not a fan of Detroit pizza or Chicago pizza. I think that's what you're asking, right? Style of pizza, because that's how I took it. There's a few places here in town, like in San Francisco. If anyone's ever in town and you're looking for good food, there's a place that's been open for a really long time called ZA, and it is some of the best pizza that I've ever had out of New York, and it's New York style. And then like I can give like locations for a lot of places. If you're ever in Austin and you want like a good New York style legitimate pizza, South Side Pizza. It is indecipherable from New York pizza. If people do like a deep dish, it's not pizza, it's lasagna, but what people call pizza, like a Detroit style pizza, excuse me. 313 is like another really well-known place in Austin. But again, it's like if you have to get a fork out to eat it, it's not pizza. Unless you're in Italy, they don't cut the pizzas there. That's another thing. Like it's probably been about a year and a half ago. Some people were in town that I've worked with over the years, like music and stuff, and we went to one of so San Francisco, outside of New York, I think has one of the largest like Italian heritage neighborhoods called North Beach, and it's pretty much like where we all go to dinner all the time. And a few people were picking on my wife because she was using a knife and fork to eat her pizza, because it's Neapolitan, so it doesn't exactly come apart very easily. And they kept saying they don't eat it like that in Italy. And then we went to Italy, and yes, they do. They actually give you scissors at the table to cut your pizza. And I just felt like so vindicated. Like, we're in the country that made it famous, and they literally expect you to either cut it at the table with a knife and fork, or sometimes they will give you scissors. There are no pizza cutters in any kitchen. It's always a pair of kitchen scissors. So it's kind of like a thing. Have I ever been to Mod's Pizza? Yes, I have. I remember liking it, but honestly, I can't remember because there were so many different options. It felt like they kind of covered a lot of bases, but I do remember thinking it was really good. But yeah, for like sort of desert island pizza, there's two places I think of. There's Za in San Francisco. It's also just like run by all the same guys that have been there forever. I've never had a bad slice, even if I get it by the slice, which that's also another thing, like for pizza people. If you love pizza but you don't know much about what makes the difference in the quality, if you're ever getting like a nice pizza, like at a fancier restaurant, not a fancier restaurant, but like a pizza place, a real pizza place, get a whole pie, not a slice. The slices, for one, it's a different texture, but they heat up differently, and they tend to sit around more often. So if you get a full pie, I mean, for one, you have stuff to take home, but two, the pie itself will be better. That is something, because I traveled for a living for so long, I could talk food all day, and for like many different cities and locations. But yeah, some of the best pizza, Za in San Francisco, or Southside Pizza in Austin, is great. They have a couple locations, and they're all really good. Like, we used to frequent those places all the time. I'm trying to think if I know of any other places. There's also like when we'd play in Brooklyn, we would just try to find the most like grandmother run looking pizza parlor that we could find, and I was never disappointed. There was one place where the actual pizza was called Grandmother's Pizza, and everybody got it, and it was like one of those moments where everyone stopped talking because it was so good. But again, that was like New York style, big foldable slice, you know. But yeah, I basically, like I talked about it, I think I mentioned at the beginning of almost all these drawings, because I go and run for over an hour, and then I sit down, I come home and get cleaned up and sit down to draw. I basically just run all the time for cardio health, but because I want to be able to eat pizza and like drink a beer. It's pretty much that simple. So if I can earn those calories and, you know, steady my heart a little bit, then I don't know, I feel like that's kind of what makes people live for longer, even though it's not the healthiest food all the time. You got to eat some stuff that gives you like a big endorphin rush, and then I don't know. I also saw, I don't know if this will be relevant to anyone. I'm a big beer guy, like not in general, like I don't live on beer, but I like a good beer. I'm very particular and picky about that as well. I saw this whole breakdown of how having pizza and a beer, and this is for people over 21 or 18 if you're in Europe, having pizza and beer crashes your blood sugar less than having pizza and a soda. So or most other drinks, actually. Yeah, IPA is a good one. Got a lot of IPA stories. I actually had never had it until I was in a touring band in like 2009, I think. And our drummer, actually, I mentioned earlier, a guy named Alex, one of my oldest friends, his dad is from India. And so he had like all the knowledge on Indian Pale Ales. And he was shocked that I'd never had one. And I still remember that tour being both one of the most fun and one of the most like rough mornings I've ever had, because we were like having IPA everywhere. But I found out that IPA has a similar effect to soy with men, and it can give you man boobs. So I quit drinking it as much, and it's a little easier the day after when you're not drinking IPA. I like a lager, like a non-sweet, typically Belgian or French style lager, or like there's one. I feel like everyone's about to dip and not want to hear me talk about this, but we went to Italy earlier in the year, and there's a beer there that is kind of like, I tried to talk with one of the guys about like, why is this different than other or than everywhere else, and it's everywhere. It's in the airport. It's everywhere. It's called Ignusa, and it's from Sardinia, I think. It's from a smaller island. And he said it's kind of like their, not like a Bud Light, but sort of like their basic, like regional beer. And there's Ignusa Filtrata and Ignusa Non-Filtrata. And there's one that has a white label. I think it's actually the filtered one. It's one of my favorites. Or another basic one. I have a running joke with some of my good friends that I just like dad beer, like easy beers. But that's one of my favorites. I love Kronenberg, especially if it's pulled from a tap in the UK. There's just something that's like a different carbonation there. It's a little more crisp. One of like the coolest venues I ever got to play in my whole career was, oh man, now I'm blanking on the name. The Dome in London, and it's a place where a bunch of like really historic shows happen, and it's a listed building, so it's all like really cool in the backstage, like green room areas. And they just had these like flats of little mini Kronenbergs, and I never had one before. And we were on a like kind of a funny show. We were playing in front of this younger half Scottish band, and I think the crowd was confused because that band, I don't know that any of them had like beards or could grow a beard or a mustache. And then a bunch of like bearded tattooed Americans got up and played a really loud rock show, and then we all went, and not all of us, but a couple of us went back and crushed a bunch of Kronenbergs. But yeah, anyway, if anyone else more food questions, I can talk many foods. I feel like pizza was a good question. It seemed like everyone stayed on for that one. As soon as I started talking about beer, there was like a hard dip. But it might just be an age thing. Maybe it's a different demo. Maybe I should just start drawing food. Favorite dessert? I don't really go for sweets a lot. It's kind of a tough one. I used to love ice cream. When I was a kid, my dad worked at Bluebell Ice Cream. It's, if you're American, you probably know it. It's like more predominant in the South. So there's a couple, like they did a seasonal peppermint ice cream that he used to get early because he worked there. Or like coffee ice cream from them is another one that I like a lot. I kind of have odd taste when it comes to desserts. Like I'd rather have like a really strong coffee ice cream than anything super sweet. But desserts now, I don't know. I'm trying to think of. It'd probably have to be like a cannoli. Like there's a place in North Beach here in San Francisco that makes some really great super crispy cannolis. I like that. But yeah, desserts are a tougher one for me. I don't really. I know I just said I could talk about food all day, but I'm trying to think of any sort of like stellar desserts I've ever had in all the traveling. Grand Central Station is such a good idea. What is that, the brand or the flavor? I'm assuming flavor, because like graham cracker. Or maybe it's just a play on words for the actual name of the company. Yeah, I could talk ice cream for a while. I mean, because I grew up kind of living on Bluebell. I don't know. I think it's because I'm from Texas. Like, oh, okay, gotcha. Bluebell is just kind of like standard. Like anytime people would say they had ice cream and they'd get out like a, what is it, Briars or what's the one in the striped things, I would always feel like this like sinking feeling of, oh, I don't want that. It's not ice cream, you know, because it wasn't Bluebell. But they caught some flack some years ago because they had like a listeria scare. So I think it's fallen out of favor for a lot of people. But I don't know. When I was a kid, we would have like a Coke float with Bluebell homemade vanilla, and that's a taste that I haven't had a soda in probably 15 years, but I still remember that exact taste. Um, you only ever are you in Florida? But a few Floridians here. Yeah, with ice cream in general, never really been like a fan of Ben and Jerry's. I feel like they should just have like the dentist information on those tubs of ice cream because I feel like it's so rich that it makes my whole head hurt. But for the most part, I like savory stuff, um, just in general. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, Florida's an interesting place. I've only ever been there a few times. One of the first things I learned was don't go there for shows. It's more of like if you want to go on vacation, that's the place. Or if you're into like fishing, beaches, like really good Cuban food, stuff like that. But when we played shows there, the kind of general feeling afterwards was let's not go play shows there again. But that could have also just been like the time and the type of music. But to be fair, it was like three different genres of music, and man, did they not like us. So could have just been that those bands were not good, but we were received well in other places. I'm still just kind of waiting around to see if anyone else has questions. I'm very happy to keep talking about food. I feel like if I'm talking about drawing hair while I'm drawing hair, I might fall asleep. Or really whatever, if anyone has questions in general. Favorite movie genre? That's a tough one. I have to think about that for a second. I'm a big fan of, like, I don't know that you'd call it a genre, it's more of a style of movies, but like historical films. Um, like a good example is Amsterdam, the David O. Russell film. That's a great, it's kind of a great film about a true story between World War One and Two, but it's not boring like a documentary might be. So you get like the real, there's, name changes for some of the people, but you do get like the real story of that, and then you also get like caught up in sort of the romance and wildness of all the stuff in there. I don't know. I think genres, it's a tough one for me. I can tell you genres I don't like more than the ones I do, because I feel like otherwise it's sort of all over the place. I'm not a big horror guy, and it's mainly just because I have like a really vivid imagination and I tend to dream about stuff that I watch. That said, there are some films I like. I used to be just obsessed with sci-fi. I've definitely seen the movie Fury. A couple days ago, I probably talked about it for an hour on here when I was drawing Brad Pitt for the first time, or like the first day. Love Fury. Actually know a probably annoying amount of stuff about Fury, but that's kind of what I mean. Like, that's a historic. Like, to some people, they think it's inaccurate because of the age and the casting, but what they were trying to do, David Ayers made that film so they looked like they were all battle worn. So everyone was meant to be cast aged up, except for Norman, who was played by Logan Lerman. And there's a reason why there's like such a disparity in their ages, and it's for that reason, because he wanted it to look like they had all been in the tank for 15 years with all the stress. But that's a good example. I do like that stuff. Another like really interesting thing about that film that I don't think they ever really talked about a ton, there's an actor named Stephen Root. If you look him up, you'd know exactly who he is. He's in everything from News Radio to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? He's in Office Space. I mean, he's in so much stuff. He always plays a pretty different character. Stephen Root, his dad is actually basically who Brad Pitt's character is based on. He was an infantryman before, or after World War II, after World War I, before World War II. And there's lines in that movie that basically come from his real life story. And there's like stuff that I didn't know until I heard him give an interview, and he said, the movie Fury is basically based on my dad and his platoon. And essentially, like, there's a part in it where Michael Pena starts talking about horses, asking if they like horses, and you see Brad Pitt's character, Top or Don, get really mad, and he throws his fork down. That's in reference to the guys that were in the tank division, basically the mobile infantry in World War II. They all were horse trainers. Every one of them had a horse that was assigned to them, and that's what they did all the time for years, because they were non-commissioned. They joined to be a part of the whole thing well before the war had started. And that's probably not the most like YouTube subject friendly thing, but they were all ordered to put their horses down and then join the tank mobile infantry. And that's what that line is in reference to in Fury, when they make him mad at the table. So it's kind of like there's all these like weird deep cuts in that film, but also David Ayers, the director, is kind of famous for making people, he's kind of like Kubrick method, where he makes people fist fight a lot if they have to have tension, or he will literally, if somebody's not giving the performance that he wants, then he'll physically get involved. Like, he and Barenthal and all those guys have like wrestled a ton and fought a bunch, like literally fist fought each other. There's like even moments where Clint Eastwood's son, I'm drawing a blank on his name, I think Scott Eastwood, he spits on the back of their tank at one point, and Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf were in character so much that they hopped off the tank and started fighting with him, and then he was having to explain Ayers told him to do it because it was a sign of good luck. Infantrymen used to do that on the tanks. So like the level of detail in all of that film, I think, is astonishing on its own. But yeah, I like stuff like that, which is like the most classic, my age demographic sort of thing, you know. But yeah, I like movies like that a lot. Was also a big fan of like Ford versus Ferrari, even though I really didn't like the music in it. I feel like it was kind of the one failure. I thought it would have better music because the director of that also directed Walk the Line and had worked with T-Bone Burnett a couple times. And it was kind of like a failure in that cinematically. But let's see. I don't dream a lot. It kind of ranges. I think it's like stress dependent, workout dependent, how close I eat to bedtime, which I try to stretch out a few hours. When I toured, I would dream all the time because it would be sleeping in a different place every night, different noise, stuff like that. I think that kind of answers that question. But you said yeah or books. Books, I mean, I used to read nonstop, especially when I traveled, and I read less frequently now. I still read, but I really like Sam Shepard, like the Motel Chronicles. I'm currently reading Giant right now, which is the Edna Ferber book that they based the James Dean film on. I used to really like have a soft spot for that Zodiac book that Robert Graysmith wrote, and then read a bunch of stuff about how he really missed the mark and conflated a bunch of details and kind of threw off like any sort of follow-up on the Zodiac case because he sort of tarnished a lot of people's reputations, and it made me feel a little differently, even though that's like one of my all-time favorite movies, which also ties into what I'm drawing because David Fincher made it and they're longtime partners. But I like, let's see, I'm trying to think like some of my favorite books. I used to be really obsessed with everything that S.E. Hinton wrote because she kind of nailed like the area where I grew up. She wrote The Outsiders, Tax, Rumblefish, That Was Then, This Is Now. Love Cormac McCarthy. Trying to think of I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place. I've read a lot of like Christopher Hitchens, I've read a lot of Dawkins. I don't know, just different phases of life. Like really kind of just interested in like different approaches, not only in style of book, but I don't know. And of course, I've like read a lot of the classics. Really like Hemingway a lot. I think that's also become kind of like a cliche answer, but it's sort of like asking a guy what their favorite movie is, and they say Fight Club. It's like, yeah, I do love Fight Club. I mean, it's a good book and a good film. I like Hemingway a lot. I like Hunter S. Thompson a lot. I sort of prefer like a really terse writer, someone who's really to the point and direct. And both Hemingway and Hunter S. Thompson were not only like that, but they were really calculated, like in terms of how, like, I don't know, the economy of words is the best way I can put it. I also like Steinbeck a lot. I feel like I'm kind of one of those guys that, or not guys, just people. I'm one of those people that really likes a lot of stuff from the past in terms of like literature, and I don't really read much modern stuff. I can't really do the thing of like reading the most popular book out right now. Like I get why people do that. It's like watching new movies, but I just don't read that way. Douglas Adams was also another really big writer for me. There's a story that I always think about with him because a lot of his friends sort of like lovingly referred to him as the master of perspective. So I mentioned a few days ago, I'm a really big fan of Doctor Who, and he wrote some of my favorite episodes in the Tom Baker series, and which are Pirate Planet is the main one. You can really tell it's written by Douglas Adams. He also, for anyone who doesn't know right off the top of your head, that's the guy that wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. He's written a lot of really great stuff. But what I loved about him is his ability to kind of find a punchline in just about anything. And there's a story he tells, I think it's on David Letterman. I mean, early David Letterman, so it's into the 80s, early 90s. But he basically, like, and this kind of sums up why I like his writing. He sat down at King's Cross, the above ground train station in London. So not like a subway station. And a guy sat across from him, and they both were reading the paper, and the guy across from him opens Douglas Adams' package of cookies and takes one. And so the way he tells it is like any red-blooded Englishman, he did exactly what you would think he would do, which was nothing. And then they just one for one sat there and awkwardly ate Douglas Adams cookies, or biscuits is what he calls them, until they call the other guy's train, and he gets up, folds his paper, and leaves. And then Douglas Adams is left there for a while. And then his train is about to go, and he gets up and he folds his paper, and then he lifts it up and he realizes that the cookies he bought were under his paper, and he was eating a stranger's cookies one for one with that stranger. And he said the thing that he loved about that story is that he knew the punchline, but the stranger didn't. He just thought there was a rude man reading a paper, eating his cookies. And that's kind of like, it sums up how he saw everything. He was a really great sort of director of perspective as well. He also wrote, it was I don't know if it was a periodical, but it was for magazines at first. He and I can't remember the guy's last name, Mark something, he was a zoologist. They traveled the world and saw land masses and animals, and it was called Last Chance to See. And a few years back, Stephen Fry did a follow-up series of it because they were good friends, and during the original Last Chance to See, Douglas Adams would write him and tell him to mail different film stocks and lenses, and Stephen Fry lived at his house for a while, and he kind of acted as like a long-distance assistant. And so I really liked that book, but there's all this stuff in there that he kind of is great at subverting attention. Like, he's talking about animals marking and leaving like a musk and stuff like that, and then kind of seamlessly shifts into talking about how he absent-mindedly bought aftershave and has been burying it deep in the drawers of the hotels where no cleaning person would find it. And it's just like silliness, but also documenting all these like soon-to-be forgotten animals and land masses. So I think that was a really long answer to your question, but in terms of books, that's kind of like a smattering of the stuff that I like. And of course, I've read like a lot of sci-fi, a lot of Ray Bradbury, something that I collect, and it's honestly, I'm not sure that I could even recall any of the names, but Stubbles are some of my favorite books. They're kind of a forgotten thing, but there's a few bookstores across the country where I've found stacks of them, and I usually buy a few. But it's one book on one side, and then you flip it over, and halfway through it's a different book. So it's basically like a double short novel, and they're westerns and sci-fi. They always have like a funny sort of classic tagline to them where it's like it'll say something about how like he went to draw, and there's always a faster hand, you know, and it's like a cowboy story. And they have like a lot of sort of noir, like detective stories as well. Anyway, I really chased everyone out with that answer, but you know, That's what I do here. I'm getting to the point where I might just leave his hair as it is. Again, this is a little bit of a glare because I've got these diffused lights, so you're kind of losing some of the definition in his actual hair. But I'm going to build up a little bit more of the depth in his face. Yeah, hopefully that answered. I mean, I could ramble about books and films, just like anything else. I tend to rant, but yeah, that's kind of like a couple off the top of my head. Speaking of novels, I've talked about it a little bit, but the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that this is from was actually a pretty good read. Without spoiling anything, I didn't love, I'd say like the back like 20% of the book, but for different reasons than why it got panned on reviews, I just felt like it sort of, I feel like he got tired when he was filming or when he was writing the book, like almost like he didn't want to repeat anything too much, and so it sort of fell off in my opinion, but it was still a really good read. Worst nightmare? I don't know. It's probably falling stuff. I used to climb a lot, so when I was climbing and I would be really exhausted, I would have like grip strength nightmares. So it's like that, or like I used to have this like really, I mean, I think it's a common fear, especially for people that are newer to climbing. I don't love heights, and that was kind of why I got into it. I was also like coming off of a few injuries in jiu-jitsu, and so I wanted to do something in the meantime to see, like, to just like keep in shape and sort of keep like the healthy cortisol part going. And so I started climbing to kind of get ahead of being afraid of heights, and ended up really loving it. And I'd have dreams about that. It was sort of like kind of relatable to I used to have a job at one point where I worked in a shoe store, I mean, a long, long time ago. And I used to dream about kind of Tetrising the boxes on the backstock shelves, and it was sort of akin to that. Yeah, I did jiu-jitsu for a couple years. I'm trying to think. I used to do Muay Thai as well. But yeah, just like one too many. I didn't really know it until after the fact, but I was at sort of a McDojo where they were looking at like high sign up rate instead of really passing on the art of it, which at some point I may get back into it, but I'd want to go to like more of a Paragon type school where it's more like one-on-one drilling on the knees for a long time until you get up and start tossing people around. I think it also is like really dependent on instructors, and I had an instructor I really clicked with, and I started like in the middle of winter in Texas, and so it was freezing in this sort of like warehouse. I have like really fond memories of that, and was obsessed with it. I also like playing chess, so it is like human chess, you know. But they switched buildings, and all the instructors' schedules changed, and I ended up with a few people that I think they were like buddies with the owner, and that's how they kept their jobs, because they seemed to be kind of irresponsible, and there was kind of like a white belt gauntlet thing, and I got to the point where I was, in quotes, showing up on accident for like the upper classes, knowing that they'd let me roll anyway, um, because I knew most injuries came from overtraining or people forcing stuff, and early days when you're in really large classes, a lot of people get injured like that. And so I switched over to climbing after I got a wrist injury and a broken foot. So once those healed, I kind of dove in. Yeah, like that's kind of what I mean. Just for the sake of the archive, we're talking about different jujitsu stuff, but you were saying your dojo was all about the knowledge to be passed. It didn't matter what belt. Yeah, like that's kind of what I was looking for. There's a school in Austin called Paragon that kind of is great about that, and a lot of the people that roll there have that mentality. And they're not to knock the school I was in. I won't name it just because I'm still friends with a lot of the guys that go. But it was just kind of like poorly put together, and like you know, I also had a toddler when my foot got broken, so I was chasing her around on crutches. It was a pretty miserable time. But sort of a lack of attention to detail in like the administration of the school sort of made me not really want to dig back in. And I've already done like a bunch of years of uh, like sort of harder drilling on stuff with actual full contact from Muay Thai, and so like I don't know how much of that I need in my life. It's like I'm probably all full on CTE, and like that was kind of what I liked about jiu-jitsu, is that there was no striking. But with some of the guys doing like hip tosses, and you get guys that would float in from another city and then they just basically want to like maul everybody on the mats. I got to the point where I was getting less and less out of it after the injuries. But yeah, to go back what I was just answering his question, I think worst nightmares will be climbing failure dreams. Like I always used to panic when I first started climbing about tying in, because we were doing manual belay with ATCs, which if anyone climbs, they'll know what that means. It's basically a handbrake. It's not automatic. Um, so you're really at the mercy of whether or not you tied in properly on your harness, and if your climbing partner who's belaying is paying attention. Um, and so I would have like real panic dreams about like either my rope coming undone and slipping off, or stuff like that. But I think pretty standard things, usually related to exertion and diet and all that stuff. But maybe I'll get back into it. I do miss certain elements of it if I ever can find a school that I like, or could just drill like more one-on-one for the first 6 months to get really back into it. I still have a lot of people um, that I talk with that are still going pretty strong. But I always say jiu-jitsu is kind of like the new, like having a guitar in the corner of your apartment. Like everyone has one, but not everyone's great at it. It's kind of like I mean, no knock on it. I feel like that's how it is. But I feel like the more people I talk to, they're like, oh, you do too? Yeah. And then you start to wonder, like, what are you getting out of the training? Like, is it the drilling that you're liking? Are you competing? Are you trying to get in good shape? I don't know. I always thought that was funny too. The school that I went to, when I signed up, we were friends with the owner and their family and all that. And they were like, you won't have to work out. You'll get your workout here. And then the first week, somebody like folded my clothes for me without me getting out of them, and really like cranked my neck. And he was like, oh, you should work out. It'd be better for you if you work out. It's like, well, you told me I didn't have to. I also had an instructor who said, don't watch YouTube, learn everything in here. And then I was rolling with a blue belt, and he had a couple stripes. And man, he did a baseball choke on me. And the way that I ended up in it, he was kind of blocking one arm, so I was trying to tap with my foot. It was like a whole thing. And then that instructor that night was like, you should watch some YouTube, like to get caught up. It's also a system where they didn't start you with the basics. They start or they do a 16-week program. And you just start wherever they are. And I started on week 14. I was like, shouldn't I wait 2 weeks so it starts over? And he's like, no. No one ever does that. And then, 3 weeks in, someone said you should have waited 2 weeks, so you started the basics. So it was kind of like the administration of the school was just so sloppy that ultimately kind of ended up like, I think, really being a lot of what led to the injuries, because the injuries weren't from overtraining. It was from people not knowing what they were doing and trying to force stuff. But I also, there was just like kind of rules and etiquette I didn't like. Like a couple other schools that that was like researching to see if I wanted to switch, you know, like Paragon's a good one. They have like laundry rules, like you got to clean your gi. And the school I was in didn't. And there were a couple dudes who intentionally didn't because they wanted to smother people. They were more like about like expanding their lungs when they had you in like a compromising place. So you would just basically have to breathe in their like mildewed, sweaty gi, which is like, yeah, we're down to 8 people, so I'm just running people off. It's all right. But there was just stuff like that. It felt like kind of impure. It's not like, I don't know, like I always used to compare it to surfing. You can't fake being good at surfing. You just are or you aren't. And the water is kind of like the reckoner. It's what determines whether or not you're good. You know, because if you can't get up on your board, if you can't ride a wave, if you know, it's like jiu-jitsu is the same in that way where you can't really fake being good at it. And I think that it's like there's kind of a purity about that, but then you get people that sort of have more of a mat bully mentality and they kind of ruin it for a lot of people. But also just like being a musician and having a kid, I don't really want to be walking around on a busted foot and a broken wrist. But I don't know, I have some good memories of that time and met some cool people. But I think before I get back into that, I'd probably go climb again. Like I still have all my gear for that. I'm certified to belay and all that, so it's a slightly easier approach for me. Also, depending on where I climb, like there's a bunch of great gyms in the Bay Area, but there's one that has a full view of the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate, depending on what end of the gym you're in. So it's kind of like a little bit more rewarding once you get to the top of a wall. But I also top climb. I don't boulder, so it's a different vibe than what a lot of people get. Hopefully y'all are seeing this in more of an HD picture than I am. It looks pretty soft on my playback, but it's hard to tell. It's got a little glare to it. I might not go for the full 3 hours tonight, the last several nights I have, but I was thinking I might save starting a new portrait for tomorrow's drawing. Just because I'm not 100% sure on who I want to draw. I liked the suggestion earlier of doing a Bob Ross portrait. I'm kind of on the fence. I think I'm torn between him or Owen Wilson, just to get a little bit of different facial geography going on. If anyone watching now or later in the archive has suggestions, even if it's not for the very next video, throw them out. But I tend to like to draw recognizable faces. I also do commissions, but you got to go through my website for that. So my people can talk to your people, as they say. And then these are all for sale. So like if anyone wants the original one of ones, they're for sale, or I can get prints if people are interested. But yeah, I don't want to rush picking a portrait and then spend 3 days on one that I feel like I should have gotten a better reference for, so I wouldn't be able to start Bob Ross right now anyway. But I may also just stay in line with film-oriented people, so if anyone's thinking of anyone like, I don't know, there's a small portrait I did of Michael Fassbender a while ago that I wouldn't mind recreating in a larger format like this. I don't know if Jose is still in here, but asking about favorite genres and films and stuff like that. I'm also a big fan of the Alien films. Not all of them, but the first Alien, Ridley Scott, yes. I'm also like one of the defenders of the prequels. I really loved Prometheus. I loved Covenant. I have one gripe about Covenant, but it's like so minimal. It's a dialogue thing. It's mainly about Danny McBride's character. His name is Tennessee, or that's what they call him. And they say his name or T, I think 150 times in that movie, and I really don't like that. Maybe it's just like where I'm from, but I don't think that anyone says anyone's name or nickname that often in any conversational setting, even if it's a serious one. Especially if it's a serious one, I feel like when you're stressed or heated, the last thing you do is keep repeating someone's name. But yeah, I like those a lot. And then just in general, I don't know if Jose's gone, but just on that line of thought, I'm a big fan of Westerns, but like a specific type of a Western. More of a realistic, not so much spaghetti Western. I'd say like Slow West is probably one of my all-time favorites. Which, cool fact about that, was written by the bass player of, it's like the fourth time I've done this tonight where I'm blanking on their name, the Beta Band. But that's a great film, great Western, great film in general. Really like Slow West. There's another one, for whatever reason, I can never remember the name. It's a Scott Cooper Western that has Christian Bale and I mean the entire cast is really great. Rosamund Pike, Timothy Chalamet has a really small part. One of my old buddies is in it. And then there's Ben Foster's in it. Or speaking of Ben Foster, 3:10 to Yuma is a great Western, the original and the remake. But yeah, I think like Westerns are kind of a lost art at this point. Everyone's trying to do like a sort of spaghetti, everyone wins in the end kind of thing. I don't know, so I feel like when people really get it right, it's pretty cool. But Slow West, I think, is one of my favorites of all time. Just like leaned up to look and see what you said and then made an accidental mark. It's all right. Yeah. I think I know the movie you're talking about. I don't know if anyone can remember, but what's the Scott Cooper, Christian Bale Western with Rosamund Pike, Jesse Plemons, Timothy Chalamet, Ben Foster. It also has, what's his name? He's great and everything. Roy McCann. He's been great his entire career. He's great in Black Mass, another Scott Cooper film. I was talking about that the other night because it has Johnny Depp in it. Not 3:10 to Yuma. That does have Ben Foster though, and Christian Bale. No, I can never remember the name. It's more about them escorting natives back to like their home territory so one of them can be buried properly. I think it's one word. Can never remember it. But that's a great film. It's dark though, so if anyone's taking those recommendations, a word of caution before you watch it. Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to remember the name of that film, and I just can't. I also don't want to stop drawing at this point because I'm getting pretty close to finishing this one. Kind of on the fence. I might forgo the stubble, but maybe I will add it because he just barely has like a 5 o'clock shadow in this. Two meals for Sister Sarah. Yeah. Man, it's gonna drive me nuts to not remember that film. Trying to. I struggled to remember the name of the film. Hostiles. There you go. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's a great film. It's it's one of the few. I mentioned this the other night. One of my buddies that used to like revolve around my band, and we kind of like shared bandmates and stuff. He has gone on to be more of an actor than a musician, even though he was a great musician, great writer. He's in a lot of films that, as much as I try, I can't unsee him as the guy I know. And Hostiles is one of them where I can see past it. Like, and it's not nothing to do with him acting. It's just that we've hung out enough that I don't know. I think it's probably like that anytime you really know someone. Um, but he has a great small role. But his one of his scenes with Ben Foster is, I think, one of the best. I won't spoil anything, but it's one of the best of any stressful scene in any Western. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of great elements. It is dark though, so it's pretty heavy. Um, yeah, Hostiles is great. Slow West, I still think, is probably one of my all-time favorite westerns. Of course, Tombstone is great for 1,000 different reasons. I also just know like a ridiculous amount of trivia about Tombstone. Yeah, I think like the difference of Slow West and those other ones is that it feels a little bit more like you're there on the trip with them, and it's not so much like based in editing and time jumps. And same with Hostels, like they both have that feel of you're basically in it until you figure out what the end of the film is. So there's something about that that I don't think a lot of Westerns do very well. I think a lot of Westerns also really rely on the violence more than like menace qualities, you know, like what makes the violence actually necessary. I think that's like one of the things I was a little shocked with, like going back to Quentin Tarantino stuff, is that like I think that Hateful Eight got a bad rap, but there's a lot more exposition than you would expect. It's basically Reservoir Dogs in Western form. They're all in one set for the majority of the film. A lot of exposition, a lot of character building. You know, still has the classic Tarantino time jumps, but isn't solely relying on sort of like Western or spaghetti Western tropes. It's a lot more of a tension builder. Yeah, True Grit's great. Are you talking about the original with John Wayne or the remake? I like both. I'm a big fan of Jeff Bridges, so there's like something very I don't know. Like I don't really think there's anything he's ever done that I don't like, including like Starman and all that stuff, all his old stuff, early work. Yeah, both are great. For different reasons too. Like I don't know, something a really interesting thing. If you're a John Wayne fan, I know a lot of people are pretty down on him in modern culture, but something that I learned somewhat recently is that the way that John Wayne spoke, that classic slow Western sort of drawl, is based on the real Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp lived into the 1920s, and a lot of Western actors, like all of his pallbearers, were Tom Mix and, you know, like very famous Western cowboy actors. And John Wayne, I'm trying to think of his actual real name. It's Marion something. I don't know if you know that or not, but yeah, his real first name is Marion. It's not John. His speaking voice in films is modeled after the actual real life Wyatt Earp. So he basically was mimicking him and then carried that through his career. So it's kind of a weird thing because it's sort of reverse engineered where everyone thinks like, oh, this fake cowboy accent, but in reality, that's from him having met Wyatt Earp. So I've got a lot of weird John Wayne trivia. Also, the last film, when he played Genghis Khan, that is literally what killed him. They were acting in lightly radiated soil from a bunch of nuclear testing. Like everyone on that film, cast and crew, pretty much all got the same type of lymphoma. But yeah, John Wayne is another one. I hope this is reading better than it looks on here, man. It's so contrasted. Really kind of losing. Yeah, even when they wrapped on the outside set of the Genghis Khan film, which is an awful film, it's terrible. It's him doing his normal John Wayne voice, but dressed as Genghis Khan. It's kind of funny. But when they wrapped on it and they went to shoot indoor scenes for it, they loaded dump trucks full of like radiated sand from like nuclear tests. And so even when they were in the studio filming those scenes, that's what they're rolling around in. Like all the fight scenes where they're kicking up all that dirt and stuff. So there's all kinds of things wrong with that film. But yeah, I thought like one of the coolest things though is that his actual speaking voice in films, the John Wayne accent, is Wyatt Earp's true speaking voice. Just like a great nod to having a real way of carrying himself. Because I mean, I think also it makes it a little bit more understandable that he stuck with that accent no matter what. Because, you know, if you're going to be a tough guy, you may as well emulate someone who was actually tough. No knock on him, but, you know, there's actor tough and then there's real Earp brother stuff. Which the Earps were a fascinating family. He was actually, like, a lot more of the Earps were criminals and not so much the heroes of the story that you see him painted as in the films. Wyatt actually was on the run, like from Arkansas and a few other states. And then, like, Virgil was more, the oldest brother was more of like the upright, sort of responsible one. Which, a crazy thing about Virgil Earp, I've officially chased everyone out except for 2 people. It's all good. I may as well, I've got 7 more minutes to draw, so I'll just go to the 3-hour mark. But Virgil Earp, the oldest brother, when he was in the Civil War, his wife and daughter thought he passed away, and so they moved off out of the South and moved to Oregon. And then found out later on, like after he had remarried and kind of had his whole story that everyone knows in pop culture, found out that they were still alive, and then went up there and reconnected with him years and years later. So he's actually buried with his family in, like, outside of Portland, I think. Yeah, I could literally just offer tons of useless information like that, which I have been. It's basically the last 24 days of drawing. That's exactly what I've done, is just talk at random about stuff like this. Which do I like better, the Wide Earp with Costner or Tombstone? As a movie, Tombstone, like the Kurt Russell one, is, I think, far superior for a bunch of reasons. I mentioned this last night, but like the briefest synopsis of that is that it started with one guy as the director. Then the production company disagreed with him, even though Kurt Russell fought for him, and they fired him. And so then, in order to keep it on production schedule until they figured out the replacement director, Kurt Russell actually directed a lot of the film. That's why a lot of stuff feels kind of disjointed. If you ever watch the extended cut, there's scenes that I think kind of lay the details better, but were obviously cut for runtime in the theaters. I think that it's hard to really compete with Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday, even though I don't mind what's his name, Quaid, Dennis Quaid. I don't mind his character. It's just the accent alone is like a, like Val Kilmer had a dialect coach who had recordings of one of the last known people that had the very specific accent that Doc Holliday and his family would have had, because he was actually a dentist. I think he was like a registered dentist, got tuberculosis, or what they called lung disease, and then he went to a drier climate to basically live a little bit longer. But in real life, Doc Holliday was actually a pretty despicable dude. Like one of the most sort of I don't know, historically checkered characters. Kilmer was like, he made him likable, even though he clearly was doing bad stuff in the film in different spots. But I'm not one of those guys that dislikes Costner. I think he's great when he's great, I think usually when his movies miss, it's kind of like the whole thing misses, like Waterworld, where we all could have done without that. But I do like that they added more of the backstory in the Costner one. So you see a little bit more of him being an actual criminal, because I think he was getting charged with being a horse thief. And then, like, I think in self-defense, he accidentally, like, went too far in a fight or something. So you see more of that. But there's also all kinds of other film history that's attached to the Costner one. Michael Madsen, who recently passed away. That'd actually be a great portrait. I love Michael Madsen. He was supposed to be Vincent Vega in Pulp Fiction. He had already played, I think, it was one of the other Vegas. It was meant to be what later Tarantino described as Vincent Vega's cousin in Reservoir Dogs, Mr. Blonde. But he had already said yes and signed he'd already signed the contract to be in Costner's Wyatt Earp film. And so there was no backing out, and so he had to tell Tarantino no, and that's how Travolta ended up in the film as Vincent Vega. That was supposed to be Madsen the whole time. So like now that I know that, like even though that was Travolta's like sort of comeback film, it's hard to see that and not wish it was Michael Madsen, you know, because I don't think he's ever been in a bad role. You know, like even like small parts, like I mean he's the foster dad in Free Willy. He's great in that too. You know, he's good in everything. Yeah, Waterworld was trash. It's one of the worst. I've still watched it probably 1,000 times. I mean, it's classic Costner, I guess, but I wouldn't call it a good film. Yeah, Madsen basically lost out on Vincent Vega because he was in the Wyatt Earp one. So, you know, I see stuff like that, and that movie pales in comparison to Pulp Fiction as well. So it's kind of like it has a lot of stuff stacked against it where it's hard for me to know those things and not feel a little bit kind of torn on it, you know. But I still think, you know, Tombstone, flaws and all, because that one, I was talking about this, I think, yesterday or the day before. It has a bunch of, like, really glaring errors that I just can't unsee, and it's something I do with every movie where I'll notice little editing cuts that they didn't catch, you know, like little inconsistencies and, like, kind of what people call, like, goofs now. If you look on, like, IMDb, Tombstone is rife with them, but it's great all the same though. I had a borrowed copy of that on VHS in the 90s, and I wore that thing out because I would watch it and rewind it and then rewatch it. I think in terms of like Western shows, I think Deadwood's another good one. It's more of an exposition show than it is like a violent show, even though it's got plenty of that. I think that's kind of an underappreciated one because of how it ended. And then they did the follow-up movie, which basically was like I think like almost unnecessary. I would have rather not had that and just rewatched the show many times and wish that it had a different ending. That's also a good example of like what shows like Sons of Anarchy should have been. Like they should have gone to networks where they could have had full range of dialogue. It's like one of the most unbelievable things about that show, Sons of Anarchy, is the fact that none of the bikers cuss. It just seems like a little bit too like PG-13, you know? But it's basically just like a Western with motorcycles, which is funny because that's what Taylor Sheridan said about Shantaram, the show that Charlie Hunnam made where he rides a motorcycle in some of it, and it's in India. And someone asked Taylor Sheridan what he thought, and he said it's basically just Sons of Anarchy in India, which it wasn't at all. It had like very little to do with that. And then I thought was kind of funny when they told Charlie Hunnam in an interview that Taylor Sheridan said that, he was like, it's funny because you could say the same thing about Yellowstone, that it's basically just Sons of Anarchy on horses. Yeah, best modern Western show is definitely Deadwood. I mean, there's very few that could rival that. I'm a big fan of a lot of the cast in that. I mean, it's one of those ones when you look back at it, the cast is kind of astonishing. I mean, they had Brad Dourif as the doctor. I mean, not to mention the fact that most of the small players went on to be in pretty major roles. Like even Sheriff Bullock's brother's wife, who he takes on as his wife, is Skyler in Breaking Bad. And then Saul is great in everything. I forget that actor's name, but he's, you know, Kenny Powers' brother. He's every time I see him pop up, it's kind of funny. He was in Peanut Butter Falcon. He's Duncan. He's the guy that is kind of like after Shia LaBeouf's character the whole time. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call it there for the night. Tomorrow I'll hop back on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so California time. I'll finish all the tiny details in this, and then I'll start the next portrait. So if anyone has suggestions kind of in line with the last several that I've done, which have been Josh Brolin, Brad Pitt, Joaquin Phoenix, and Johnny Depp, you can comment on any of the videos I have archived already, or wherever you find them. But yeah, I'll be back on 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow, and then for the next 12 days. And then I will be still live streaming while I'm traveling, but it'll be at different times. So nice talking with everyone. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow, hopefully.